Good evening and welcome to the Nib Presents Guwayu for All Times. I'm Daniel Browning. I'm coming to you from Bundjalung country on the far north coast of New South Wales. I'm a Bundjalung man, a Guri, and on my mother's side, I'm Cullally from southwest Queensland. So tonight's event is presented by the Nib with thanks to Red Room Poetry. This event is being recorded and will be available on Waverley Council's YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. Celebrating its 20th anniversary in 2021, the Mark and Yvette Moran Nib Literary Award is Waverley Council's annual celebration of excellence in research and in writing. It's the only major national literary award of its kind presented by a local council in Australia. And this year, 150 nominations were received around the country and judging is currently underway. For those joining us from across the country or the world, the Waverley local area is located in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Excuse me, and Waverley Council acknowledges the Bidjigal and Gadigal people who traditionally occupy the Sydney coast. I would now like to introduce Auntie Lola Ryan from the La Perouse Aboriginal community in Sydney to welcome us to her country. And I'd just like to say a few words of introduction, Auntie Lola. Auntie Lola is an Aboriginal woman from La Perouse, located on the northern side of Botany Bay. She's a devoted mother to 3 children and loves spending her spare time with her family and her 2 granddaughters, aged 3 and 5 months. Auntie Lola is the Aboriginal health worker for the Child and Family Health Team of Sydney's Children's Hospital, Sydney's Children's Hospital Network at Randwick, a position she's held for 15 years. Auntie Lola's passion is improving the health outcomes for Aboriginal families with children under 5 years and to work on projects that can make a difference in engaging Aboriginal families to take care of their health and their well-being, as well as their families' needs. Auntie Lola Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, I was born and bred in La Perouse. I'm a Bidjigal Yuin woman, and we belong to the Dharawal language group. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we all meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. It's my pleasure to be here to welcome you all to our land. I hope you all are staying safe in these trying times. Sometimes it can be good to slow our lives down, but it would be under better circumstances. The Welcome to Country is our way of seeking and receiving permission from our ancestors to welcome you to our land. Traditionally, we would welcome other tribes to our land through ceremony and let them know that there are resources such as food and water in the area. When other tribes travel for our land, the rock carvings, paintings and tracks let them know what kind of food resources there are. Aboriginal people had an oral language through storytelling, song and dance, as there are many different languages throughout Australia. Today, we still use storytelling, song and dance to teach our children our culture. Our people have survived for over 60,000 years and are one of the oldest living cultures in the world. So on behalf of the La Perouse Aboriginal Land Council, my ancestors, elders and community, I welcome you all here to the Nibs Award. Guwayu, did I say that correct? I hope so. For all times, and welcome you all, and I hope you have a great evening. I think poetry is very important, as some would say. I developed a parent program, and it's an Auld Lang My group. It means we dream, and it's been running for 11 years, and we actually did a poetry book, all of our mums, and wrote all their poetry, and it's called Mother, Sister, Friend. And that was published, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. So very proud of anybody that likes to do poetry. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie Lola. It's fantastic. Published poet too. Look out. I have some questions which were submitted by members of the audience when they registered for this event. There'll also be an opportunity for questions towards the end of the session. Please use the chat function, the feature at the bottom of the screen, to send through your questions. I'll try to get to as many as I can. And don't forget to share your highlights of this session on social media with the hashtags Niblit, Niblit, Niblit 2021, hashtag Waverley Council, and hashtag Red Room Poetry. I reckon it can be said that poetry is undergoing a global renaissance. There's traffic to poetry websites. It's really, really high at the moment. Instagram-based poets have more followers than some politicians, not surprisingly, and more works being published and purchased than ever before. So locally, this interest seems to have been echoed loudest with the increasing success and critical recognition of our First Nations poets, most recently seen with Ellen Van Nieven's sweep of the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards with their work Throat. But the book of the moment is Guwayu for All Times, produced by Red Room Poetry and published by Magabala Books, the Indigenous publishing house based in Broome. Now, it's a groundbreaking anthology of First Nations poetry. It navigates the interconnections between culture, belonging, land, language, and identity, exploring poetry as both an art form and an instrument for social change. Sharing their insights, experience, and contributions to this collection and the genre as a whole, I'm excited to introduce our esteemed and very highly acclaimed panel, Guwayu, the Guwayu contributing poets. First of all, Dr Jeanine Leane. She's a multi-award-winning Wiradjuri writer, poet, and academic. Her poetry and short stories have been published widely in the area of Aboriginal literature, writing otherness, and creative non-fiction. Jeanine teaches creative writing and Aboriginal literature at the University of Melbourne and was also the editor, in inverted commas, curator of Guwayu. Jeanine, welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
Lorna Munro, or Yelini, is a Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi woman. She's a multidisciplinary artist and broadcaster at Radio Skid Row. She was the sole designer and creator of Sydney's and possibly Australia's first initiative to teach Aboriginal language through poetry, in partnership with Red Room Poetry in 2015. In 2019, Lorna was announced as the recipient of the Wheeler Centre's Next Chapter Fellowship. She's done a lot more too. Lorna Munro, welcome.
Hey, hello.
Nardi Simpson is a Uralarai writer, playwright, musician, composer and educator. Nardi's a founding member of the Indigenous folk duo Stiff Gins, and Nardi's been performing nationally and internationally for 21 years. Her debut novel, Song of the Crocodile, published by Hachette, has been greatly commended, attracting a long list of accolades. It was long-listed for the Stella Prize and the Miles Franklin, amongst others, and a finalist in the Victorian and New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards. Welcome, Nardi.
Yama, Daniel, hi to everyone.
Now, I want to begin with you, Jeanine. Extraordinary collection and really important work that these kind of collections do, in that they tell us what's happened in the immediate past and what's going to be happening in the future. But I want to ask you a question about your decision to put a poem by one of the panel members, Lorna Munro, and this particular poem in that very first part of Guwayu. You had to make some really tough decisions about what to include and what to kind of not include. But why that particular poem?
Yeah, look, Yiridu Maring, Daniel, and just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking tonight from the lands never ceded of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respect to elders, past, present, and emerging, and also like to acknowledge my fellow poets on the panel tonight, Nardi and Lorna. Yeah, look, I was the one who had the tremendous privilege of being asked to be the curator, and we talked in another time, Daniel, about why I didn't quite like the word editing because it was a bit white and a bit Western, and it, kind of reminded me too much of cutting and pasting. Curating, or more, even more appropriate word would be the gatherer. And I had that tremendous privilege, and I did have some hard decisions to make. Before I talk about Lorna's beautiful piece, I'd just like to say first and foremost that I entered into this thinking that everybody's a poet and everybody can be a poet, and that poetry is what comes from your heart. It's not about form. And in this, I had a big commitment to use every single person's work, to acknowledge every single person's work who contributed, First Nations person who contributed to Red Room. Then having said that, it was a hard decision about what to start with, but I came to Lorna's beautiful poem, Dreaming Track, and these words, hopefulness still blooms and remains strong, claps a beat, breaks through layers of questions we ask ourselves in the stillness of contemplation, and stay reminded that beauty still resides here after 228 years in silence. So now a few more years have passed since the 228. I think we're at 233 now. But this poem, of all the pieces I saw, once I decided on the word and I decided on the title, Guwayu, because I had the privilege of working with a senior auntie Elaine, on a journey into a language that should have been my birthright, but it wasn't. So I had the tremendous privilege of that journey, and I learnt that word, Guwayu, which means for all times, still and yet, now and forever, and the ever now. And then when I read these words of Lorna's, it just really encapsulated that theme about there's hope and there's strength and there's beauty in this whole collection. And those words just really encapsulated it. And I thought, yes, that's the poem that needs to go up front. Because for all the trauma and for all the damage and for all the dispossession, the attempted genocides, assimilation, the stealing of the kids, look, we're still here and we're still loud and clear, and we're not just made of trauma. Trauma's happened, certainly, but we're not just made of trauma. And I wanted to celebrate this in this book, and I actually also began the foreword to Guwayu with Lorna's words as well, because I really wanted, if people just open that book and see that hope and that strength, then I think, wow, that really sets it off on such a wonderful start to continue on through the journey of the other 34 poets who are in the book.
And it's important to say too that it's a collection of living poets.
We have a collection of living poets, and that's something also you mentioned. I teach First Nations literature, and I was also a student of a long time ago of Western literature. That's very much a dead canon. And it is, literally, and it's dead white men predominantly. And there's all those kind of Roland Barthes' comment about the author is dead. Maybe, when only authors are only white men, but we are not. And there's many exciting things about First Nations writing and poetry, but one of them is, we're a living canon. So we are alive and well, and the canon is well, despite a lot of things. And this canon does what national history has failed and is still failing to do. And I always say to people, if you want to understand Blackfellas, if you want to understand First Nations people, don't go to those history books. Come to our poetry, come to our books, because they do the work that national history has failed to do.
Lorna, I see you nodding furiously there. What do you reckon poetry does that, doesn't it? It teaches us, it asserts our identity.
I actually got goosebumps hearing that last bit, because that's exactly the motivation for me. And I know a lot of young people today is to really respond to that, this this narrative that Australia likes to put out to the rest of the world, you know, that we don't exist, we're not really Black, we don't have culture, we don't blah, 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 blah. You know, all of the most stereotypical, stigmatized ideas that exist out there about us. So I guess it's about correcting that. And yeah, I just, what an honor, you know, big honor.
When you heard Jeanine read your words, I mean, how does it feel when someone else recites your poetry? Do they hit the right note, or what do you hear when you hear other people read your poetry?
It doesn't sound like mine, and I think that's, you know, and I'm like, that's a good way, you know, like it doesn't sound like my voice. It sounds like it could be someone else's, you know, because for me, my work is such a cathartic process, especially the pieces that are included in Guwayu. Is like, you know, they're all such loaded historical spaces in Sydney that I was asked to respond to. You know, like that piece was responding to Olympic Park, and the swamp that's still out there, the boardwalk. You know, that whole poetry is now embedded in the space, and that was exactly what needed to happen, because it wasn't good enough that someone could just pick it up off the page. They needed to see it in the space. They needed to be able to hear it, you know. And then there's like all this these apps and you know, there's audio stuff that accompanies the walk and things like that. It's an immersive it's a very immersive kind of project, and that's exactly like I pushed a lot for that. It took pretty much the whole life of my son to get to that point. You know, I was asked to write it when I was pregnant with him, went out there when I was pregnant with him, you know, and the boardwalk was only just finished last year, I think. Jo Kinabara, I think, was the architect she had to design a special machine, you know, like there's a lot of work to get to that point. And then the other place that I was asked to respond to is the Rocks, you know, Government House. And I just finished working as a tour guide in the area down there at the Rocks. You know, at that point that Jo asked me to write about it, and I thought she was joking. I was like, you really want me to talk about Government House? Because it's not going to be nice. So, you know, good on them though for being so brave and chucking a little outspoken, unknown, radical Black fella from Waterloo. You know, that was always told to be quiet and you're too full on, you're too aggressive, blah, 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 you're too Black. So kudos to Red Room, you know, for giving me that go, because it was the first professional kind of writing that I was ever commissioned to do.
And that poem, Dreaming Tracks, can be heard still at Olympic Park on the boardwalk.
Yeah, there's like QR codes and there's like little codes and stuff that they can scan. It's the dreaming track has become a dreaming track.
Yeah.
It's embedded in every, like, physically with the words on the boardwalk as you walk through it. Dreaming track is actually like, if you were to walk through it, you'd be able to kind of understand. It's me picking, like me naming things as we walk along the track. And that was with Shannon. And I can't believe I'm forgetting her name at the moment. But Shannon worked extensively with me on that. Yeah, I can't believe that I'm forgetting her name. But the last name, sorry, but she's another, you know, Lapa Mob, Sydney Mob, Darawal speaker. I also worked with Evelyn a little bit when we did a performance sort of version of it, because that dreaming track, it's, again, I've forgotten the white Western words. It's a palindrome. It can be read backwards.
Yes.
And that was written specifically that way. So no matter where you entered the dreaming track, you was gonna kind of, you know, be able to follow a story. And that was a lot of work into that. So, you know, I think, like, I just think I'm clever that I wrote a palindrome, to be honest.
Like an endless loop, isn't it?
Yes.
And it represents the cycles of time, you know. Time for us is cyclical. It's not linear. And I think that's something that really speaks through my work. I think that that was something that I've been compelled by my ancestors to remind people about.
In fact, that other poem, Yulalu Bugatti, that word Yulalu, just like Guwayu, has a sense of endlessness, of not approximating anything, any time, any linear time.
So why I love that word is because Yulalu, if you look it up, it's a Gomeroi word, and it means once upon a time in the past, but also the future. Which I think is that, you know, I grew up hearing stories of our warriors, but I also grew up, you know, knowing Disney and, you know, all these fairy tales and things like that. So it's very, for me, it really captures a blackfella fairy tale, but we are a part of that fairy tale. We are someone's ancestors, you know?
I say we're ancestors waiting to be born. Yes. You know, like the whole idea that ancestors are in the past, we are ancestors. And the only thing I can hope for is to be a good ancestor.
That's it. You know, that's the job. That's the work that we have. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Nardi, might bring you in there and just talk about this. We'll come back to Lorna's poetry, because we've laid it down and we've basically said what an incredible poem it is. We have to hear it, but we'll hear some poetry from Lorna in a moment. But Nardi, you and I have spoken about the relationship between music and poetry, and how, you know, poetry is prose with cadence and rhythm. It's a lot more besides that. But thinking about that, have you had a chance to think more deeply about that idea of that the music that you compose with Stiff Chins, with Kalina Briggs, that those things that you are writing up are effectively poems?
Yeah, I struggle a little bit trying to place myself, but I mean, Jeanine, your words is at the beginning, that it is something that comes from your heart, and thinking about dreaming tracks and ancestors and, you know, long time ago, long time ahead, all this Guwayu, all that stuff reminds me that, you know, poetry and music and these disciplines don't belong to us. We're lucky. What does belong to us is we're wrapped up with all of that. So it's kind of not a tension, but there's a two-step, maybe, little dance you do to say, okay, I'm going to be on a Zoom about poetry, and I'm not a poet, but actually thinking about our ways. I have poetry in me, and everybody else has music in them, and we have the physical movement of places in us. And so it's funny, you know, because if I listen to myself saying I'm not a poet, there's truth to that, but I would tell myself off at that as well. If I was looking above myself, you know, I say, why are you saying what you're not? Just accept things, and blackfella way it all mixes up, and it comes out in this way. Some people call that poetry, and may come out in that way. At that time, some people call that music. So it's this beautiful way of being that inbuilds a block of poetry there, and, you know, all this other stuff, movement and knowledge and relationship, connection, navigation, and on and on and on and on. So I've got to keep telling myself that, you know, when people say poetry, think whole. And somewhere in that whole, which has come from who you've come from, where you're from, and where you're going, is you. But it's hard, you know. It's hard to remind yourself to, what's that? It's hard to remind yourself of those things when it's all set up. Look at us, we're in little squares here on another big square, and that sort of connectivity or the connection is different. It's hard to, it's sort of, you know, we're all like this these days. Yeah, more circles, less squares.
Yes.
In that theme of Jeanine, of everyone's a poet, we all have this in us.
Yep.
And I would say that is something that it's inborn, that we've learned. This way of expressing ourselves as blackfellas. The poetry is, if you want to call it poetry, that's okay. I do remember at the end of the Sydney Writers Festival session about Guwayu, a young fella approached me who was, he's working with Red Room, and he said, I really struggled with that word poetry and poet. I said, to call yourself something else. If the block is the word poetry or the word poet, then just push through that and continue doing what you do. Make your words, speak your truth, and don't use that word if it doesn't serve you.
Yes, Daniel, I sometimes find that too. And I think that, once again, that Western education system's got a lot to answer for, because for a long time, I thought I couldn't write poetry either, because I can't write like T.S. Eliot or Shakespeare. But it's about unlearning. And I think Lorna mentioned Evelyn's work, and Evelyn's got this beautiful line. Evelyn Araloon has this beautiful line that says we're unlearning and relearning country through poetry. And so you just got to unlearn a lot of things that you were told that you couldn't do. Like, I think a lot of us were told that we couldn't play music or that we couldn't dance as well, but we can. And I think everyone is a poet, and I think there are many different words you can use. Like, I balked, like that young person who spoke to you and found the word poet hard, because it does come with, loaded up a bit with these certain Western connotations. And it can be, in some context, a word that is a bit like elitist. When I mentioned those white men before, like the T.S. Eliots and Jared Manley Hopkins and those kind of people that were seen so much as the canon, I balk at the word editor, because to me it's sort of like reminds me of this vicious kind of cutting, whereas a gatherer is one who nurtures and brings things like together, and a curator is one who sees everything having a value, and it's just a question of putting it all in its right place so it goes together as one beautiful whole. And I think I sometimes just encourage people to call themselves, like, call yourself a wordsmith, call yourself a storyteller.
Maybe even a weaver.
I was going to say, call yourself a weaver. Call yourself, there might be a word in your language that means, like something like a storyteller or a wordster or a wordsmith. Call yourself that. Yeah, because on that note, call yourself, and on naming, part of the problem is of the nation is the nation just came and invaded over all these beautiful countries, and there's been so much terrible renaming of things. And like, country is sick when you take away its names, so you got to give. And I'll just give you a quick example, because I was born in Wagga Wagga and grew up on the Murrumbidgee and Gundagai, but I spent a great deal of my adult life in Canberra, which is on the same river. And there is this beautiful lake, was just out, you'll know it, it's on the highway, and it's called Wirrawa. But they called it, that's a beautiful name. And it means hard water, because the water in there had a particular, it's salty water, so you wouldn't drink the water, but it was very good water for other things, particularly for preserving things. And sometime in the early 19th century, early 1800s, after the invasion, that was named Lake George after George IV, who was probably about one of the sickest kings of England. Like, he, apart from all the problems that monarchs have, he had syphilitic madness, he was a philanderer, when they did that to that lake, it started to dry up. And I kind of see that as a metaphor in a way for all of us. You know, if you take, when you name something that it's not, or you load something up with false labels or false names, you kill the inner spirit. And so, you know, just fight against those names with your words and call yourself what you think you are. And I try and do that with country all the time too. I try and call it by its real name rather than the introduced things that were named over it. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that with people as well. There's that a lot of us have got to just let ourselves unlearn all that negative colonial baggage that was thrust on us. And poetry is one of those ways that we can set it all free.
100%. So Lorna.
Yeah, I just was going to jump into, you know, like, and just speak to the brilliance that was the program Yalagari, because it encapsulates all that. And we was delivering that to primary school children and high school children, young people going into uni. It, you know, that's what it was about, was trying to get people to unlearn a lot of the barriers that were, you know, things that have been identified within people's journeys. Because I can't teach anybody how to speak their language, but I can show them how I learn.
Yes.
And that was always the thing. It wasn't about, learning language, because at some point you have to unlearn English to learn language. Mm-hmm. Because the Wiradjuri worldview is not the English worldview. And I think this is where, you know, on a high academic level, like, this is why that project was such a radical thing, you know. And I'd worked with Red Room Company for a very long time. I'd literally been sent to almost every school from Western Sydney to South Sydney to Wollongong, Nowra, you know, Newcastle. And then after all that, Temrin was the one, she was like, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do something for my community. Let me design something. There's something I've been working on. This is it. You know, you're going to support me doing it? And she was like, yeah, this is great. And, you know, it was the predecessor to a lot of the programs that are running now. And I actually was trying to rope Evelyn in on that. But Evelyn and I, we've been involved in a few different projects. Black Rhymes is the most, you know, I guess like the biggest thing for me was trying to create spaces so that Black poetry could be heard in and around Redfern, especially during gentrification, because people really think that they got rid of us.
And why is poetry the form that you choose? You and spoken word. Why is that? Why is it so appropriate for you in the work that you do?
I really believe poetry picked me. And, you know, again, like talking to a lot of young people, you know, they would be like, oh, that's scamming, miss, we don't want to do that. That's scamming, art, we don't want to do that. And I say, well, you know, Tupac, you know, all these deadly rappers, you know that they were poets too. You know, you can't write music unless you can write poetry. You know, you can't do this, this, and this unless you can understand how to tell a story. You know, and I guess for me, that's where I was coming from. You know, I grew up seeing people like Nadina Dixon and Nardi, you know, perform and sing their songs. And, you know, I also grew up in that era where Lauryn Hill, you know, was breaking rules and just, you know, smashing all ideas that people had about Black female singers and wordsmiths and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, I grew up in a very, very special time in one of the, probably the most famous Black communities, you know, so I had to speak to that. And poetry was the best way. I just speak in rhyme, like, I don't know where that comes from. For me, learning language now, that's probably what it is. It's that the melody, the rhythm of language trying to break out, but I could only speak in English. you know, and if you know a little bit about language, it's poetry within itself. And I think we only say poetry because this is what other people understand what it is.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
It's their reference point.
Mm.
But, you know, that's like with all language. We only use their words because it's a reference point for them. They know what we're talking about. But it's this, this, and this, and everything else, and everything in between. But we'll say that word because you understand it. You know?
Yeah. And you just got name dropped there, Nardi. What I would say about your novel, your debut novel, Song of the Crocodile, which has a lot of language in it, and a real sense of country, a real sense of place. You realize this. You have done a lot of work with your own language, and you know what language expresses that is inexpressible. Beyond the English language, we're talking about our languages.
And I think there's something strengthening, but also beautiful in capturing that, if you write it or whatever, speak it, sing it, and the relationship you have, the ongoing, evolving relationship you have in learning and interacting with that. That moves prose and poetry and language learning into its own, whatever that there is, stratosphere. Not when you're using it to show what you know or to signpost what is there or not, but in a written or a spoken evolving relationship with language, that is a beautiful thing to be part of, whether you're a reader or a speaker or writer or whatever. So the thing, I don't know if I'm making sense. What I talk about in my book is I wanted to talk to my language and have a relationship with what I was learning, not putting it in a book to, you know, make it whatever those words are, you know, not to sprinkle some kind of cultural something in it, but for me to say, this is where I am right now in my learning. There is so much that I don't know and probably will never know, but this is how I'm navigating the sounds of my mob and my place. That's what I really wanted to do with language. I didn't want it to have it there to say, you know, to make any kind of statement other than I'm at the feet of this language and this is where I am. And when you are kind of, whatever that word is, not subjugated, some word, when you're in deference to something greater than you and you stay there and you work there, that I think that's, you know, it's hard as an artist because you want to look real deadly and this is as good as I can be, but sort of saying actually this is where I am is the people's experience of that is very human and very real and really honest, and that makes for good storytelling and right way to be, you know, with us. You know, we all know about big noters and all that sort of thing, but the people that I am drawn to are those ones who tell you where they're at and also tell you there is much more to know and more to be and help you move in whatever way. So that relationship to language is, for me, is all. I'm 46, I'm going to be 50, I'm going to have a birthday party soon, but when we're out of lockdown, I will always be a learner. Kindergarten is fine for me, sitting at the feet of Yuwalari language. That'll do me. That's a good way to be, you know, for 50, 60, 70 years.
Beautiful. That description of being at the feet of our languages. Lorna, is that something that you can you resonate with?
Oh, definitely. You know, I'm very humble in this, in saying I'm just a conduit. I'm just a conduit for something a lot bigger, something that I don't quite understand sometimes. But if someone else understands it and gets it, then deadly. You know, that's the point. Because I don't know what someone else is gonna do with these words. It's out there. You know, my job's done. My job now is to keep making sure that I give it justice, you know, give those words justice long after the feeling's gone and long after those thoughts are gone. Yeah.
On that note, can you maybe read something that you'd like to share?
Well, I'm confused now because you was like, I want to hear, you know, which one I like. And
Yeah.
But Dreaming Track is it's not in there. So I'll give you the choice. I can do this Dreaming Track one or Daniel's favorite Yalalu Bugatti, which means Once Upon a Time in the Bay of Gatti, which is Gadigal country, which is where I live. Evelyn's screaming in the chat, both. Love you.
Whichever one, I'll look Dreaming Tracks because we've talked about that.
I reckon. I think it's relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. Please disregard the disruptions, disconnect from the obstructions, the growth of this canopy, please. Unweave the wires that bind, recharge yourself and refine another way to be. See what was lost but not forgotten all of those years ago. Realign your eyes with what time has changed. Be ready to sacrifice what you see from what you feel and change your mind when you see this space. Read the descriptions that European artists forgot to enclose, already etched from the soil and ochre when they spoke of our country with fine paintbrush strokes. What is invoked for you within these mangroves? Still home to Barrangoa and Gilligan, just a swamp, each beach and cove, outlines of images emerge, inlets of goannas and snakes taking the shape recorded by warriors as they navigated this place. Rebellion still thrives within the shadows of these trees, as they always will and always have been. Bird's eye view seen from the sky, interpreting creations as Bayami inscribed them on the lids of many eyes. Inspiring song held in memories. Time will tell what we leave behind in this wasteland of ideas thought of long ago. Read the seasons, know the differences and the reasons, the sacredness embodied as we see them. Why are we here in this gathering ground of ancestors' voices rippled within the water? Watch as it ebbs and flows, and remember to not invade the space. These soldiers of salt, 2-ton towers piled high out of the wet, scream, don't touch. We once built up wealth. Observe these estuaries and streams that have once conceived poison and dreams. Light, mud stains on floodplains tell how times have changed in only some ways. Tide chases the stars away. Spirit stands strong while sun rays touch each day. Push the dark away, push the dark away, push the dark away. And with each day, learn to read the land in other ways. Hands of the bay hold lines describing what was here in the old days. Says a lot more than what the signs say. Find ways to waste the time away in the protection of the shade and hide away to another time where women fished in Noe and raised warriors strong and in the kindest of ways. These kind of bays tell our story if you find the ways. Follow the inlets and the water from Pemawai's Day to the Bay of Catti to Kamei to Barramatical to Tavaguli to the home of the Dharawal people and beyond. Hopefulness still blooms and remains strong. Claps a beat, breaks through layers of questions. We ask ourselves in the stillness of contemplation and stay reminded that beauty still resides here after 228 years in silence.
Wow.
Yep.
Thank you.
There's nothing like hearing you perform that poetry, that the energy and the anticipation is so much like the song. It's that slam, slam, slam.
Yeah, see, I would just love to keep writing and reading in my own little world, but my ancestors always dragging my soul. They always just, come on, keep it going, keep chasing, keep, you know. So I am literally just a conduit.
And there's that sense of responsibility too, that the poem becomes the instrument of so much more. It's not simply to educate, to assert identity and to make a statement about presence. It's doing something else. It's passing that message on.
It becomes ritualistic, I think, for me too, because it's exercising something. You know, not quite sure what that is, still figuring that out.
Exorcising, like releasing something?
No, exercising, like
flexing.
Oh, no, what you were saying, sorry. You know, like exercise, like bringing that out.
Yeah. On that note, Nardi, did you have something that you wanted to read?
I did do I read the song that was in Guwayu. It was so lame, but it was a really good learning experience for me, because the thing that I wrote was accompanied by melody and movement, and the words sort of didn't have that anyway. I think a lot about why that was lame, probably because, you know, I've got a touch of the lame about me, but this is a good intro to what I'm about to do. So this is a song. This is a sang thing, yeah, and it's about our boss ladies, Milroy, Birangulu, Ganabili, last one, Gurima, Mother Earth. But its structure is like what I imagine a poem is. So a bit of everything in there. Birangulu, 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 Bawila nang yaningu, Nginunda maiyo. Birangulu, 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 Bawila nang yaningu, Nginunda maiyo. Ganan bili, Ganan bili, Ganan bili, Bawila nang yaningu, Nginunda maiyo. Ganan bili, Ganan bili, Ganan bili, Bawila nang yaningu, Nginunda maiyo. Gunima, 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 Bawila nang yaningu, Nginunda maiyo. Wiringa bumala garubamba, Wiringa bumala garubamba, Bungang yaninya wiringali, Wiringa bumala garubamba.
Woohoo.
Thank you. That's we don't need to know what those words mean, but there's so much in them, in the individual word. And I said to you that what I was hearing or seeing in my mind's eye was our grandmothers at the camp around the fire. But who knows what actually happened? What's happening there?
Well, the magic is it's whatever it is for anybody. Whatever comes to you is what them old girls have putting in front, and that's the meaning. That's a beautiful thing. I've learned from poets, you know. I'm scared of poets because they're so deep, you know, but they give you something that you find you go away and jump into, and there's no right or wrong. So I'm very grateful for that door to be open, and talking and learning in that way with, you know, Lorna and Jeanine and wonderful, deadly poets like that.
I would describe it as a bit of a tone poem, that one. It's tones and, you know.
Yeah, good. I've been taking notes, so I'll put that down. All right.
But like I said to you, when I read Song of the Crocodile, when I read your novel, I read it aloud, and I found that it was more poetic than you give it credit for. That everything was poetry, and it had to be recited in order to be fully understood.
Yeah, maybe because I'm used to it with song. It's an embodied thing or a detaching thing or something. I don't know. Someone will know. But the body is so active in the life of words, for me, anyway. You can write them down and they can do something, but then when you put them in your body and you give them to someone else, then they really start to resonate. And in the writing of the book, I committed to the words by speaking them, and so it was, bodies had to be present. And I find that, you know, same thing with, you know, when Lorna reads her work, holy heck, you think, you know, you read that and it is amazing. You listen and it's that power and the gentleness and the beauty, you know. Wow. And this is a beautiful thing. You can't have one. You can have one without the other, but the experience of the whole is the dreaming, eh? Yeah.
Lorna, is that something that you could agree with? That you know, giving voice to those words, embodying them, and passing them on through the voice.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, in our traditional worldviews, in our pre-colonial, you know, worldviews, I think that we would interpret good and bad or beautiful and ugly really differently. I think in a Wiradjuri worldview, in a sense, everything is meant to be how it's meant to be. It's purposeful. You know, and I think that's the whole thing of unlearning a lot, you know, is really questioning yourself and how you perceive things. And I hope that that's what a lot of my work has done, because that was the hope, you know, the motivation for it, is to try to get people to read country the way that I do in the middle of the city. You know, I've been lucky in so many different ways to represent all these different intersections and all these great experiences in this deadly Black community that I've grown up in and still live in today. You know, but also the long line that I come from, the long line of matriarchs, the unbroken Wiradjuri matriarchal bloodline that I have. You know, that's saying something. That's saying a lot. 233 years deep in the colonial project, you know, especially when they think they wiped us all out. Yeah, I think that's the yin and yang, you know. All non-English speaking languages, they have something to describe this moving poetry, this balance, this synergy, you know, that we see and we might not have the words to describe.
And I'm just reading in the chat pane, Shannon Foster was who you collaborated with on the
yeah. I can't believe I forgot her name. I edited that sound, just going blank.
She'll be right.
I always laugh. I always say that because my younger brother, when I first started, and a lot of cousins, they'd say, how can you get up there and say stuff? Ain't you scared? And I say, like, I feel like that cartoon, you know, the dancing frog. Like like you sit away in your little spot, and then as soon as something happens, you know, like you got to put on the show, or it's the other way around. It's like when you're expected to put on the show, you want to be quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's some questions from the audience, and one of them is, I'll direct this to you, Nardi, and that's, what advice would you give to an emerging artist to showcase their work? I guess this could be across music and poetry or literature more broadly. What's the advice we give our young black fellas about becoming an artist?
I did African drumming workshop once. There was a fella from West Africa, Deadly, and he was doing, you know, little gentle little rhythmic lines, and we would copy. And they got a little bit thing, and I thought, yeah, I can see what's coming in. Then he did one, and it was so complex, and he pointed straight to me to repeat it, and I went, da, 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 you know, uncommittal. And he said, trust yourself. I thought, yeah, nailed it. And then I look back and I think, he looked me straight in the eye as a challenge, but also he knew that I may have had it in me. Trust yourself. And I did it. I did something I thought I couldn't do. Those two words, that happened 20 years ago, and I still think about that. And I think if I heard them earlier, I might be further down the track. But the good thing about as a black fella trusting yourself is we got thousands of people standing there just waiting to clap before you've done anything. So trusting yourself is a pathway to being the person that people want you to be. And there are hordes of, I've got to try and find a right word, not fans, mob, that are invested in you being happy. So trust yourself and go for it. That's the best advice I ever had, because it makes you find something. It moves you a little bit out of where you think you can, what you think you can do. And also we got that power of all those people that have gone before us to help us get there. So a little bit of self-confidence, that's all most of our mob need. That's it. And you watch us go.
So trust yourself. So Lorna, the question was, what advice you'd give to an emerging artist?
My advice, I guess, is don't get, I've got a few little pearls of wisdom, I guess. Don't let, one door closing on you stop you. Keep writing. If it resonates with you, it's going to resonate with somebody. So don't give up. Talk to other people, that. Another thing is to, they say if you want to be the deadliest writer, you got to read deadly writers. Like that's a really important thing, I think. If you want to get good at your craft, look up, and read and immerse yourself in your favorite artists' work. Know their work inside and out. And I would say just keep writing. That's how I always just end my workshops. Just keep writing. We can give you this tool. We can talk about the history. We can do all this, but really, it all boils down to just keep writing.
And I wanted to just quickly talk about the role of mentors. You talked about Lionel Fogarty, Ali Cobby Eckermann, those elders, I suppose, in the First Nations writing community who kind of pushed you. We need those mentors. In Guwayu are a lot of writers who I would consider teachers. But how important have mentors been to you?
If it wasn't for Uncle Lionel specifically, I'd still be shame and would never share anything that I ever wrote, ever. you know, it was only a chance thing that he happened to be in Sydney. You know, he knows my parents from all the Black Power movement stuff, you know, that there's that network there. So he was sitting at my mum's dinner table, and my mum just said to him, was like, Lorna writes poetry. My mum also writes poetry. We come from a long line of poets. My mum actually talks about, you know, where the opportunities for black fellas writing poetries lied before here. It was only for funerary orations and eulogies that a lot of our people write poetry. So, you know, my mum was the one that outed me to Uncle Lionel, and I read this poem to Uncle Lionel, and he started crying, and I freaked out. I was like, I didn't mean to make you cry. I'm so sorry. You know, and he was like, nah, what are you doing tomorrow? Come to the Writers' Festival. And, you know, it's about making space. It's about seeing the deadliness in people that they might not see in themselves and giving them a go. You know, you might fail, you might forget your words, you might, you know, there's all these different things that can go wrong, but at least you got up and had a go. Because once you get that thing for the microphone, and you know, you get hungry for it, like you want to do it again. It's the adrenaline and, you know, all these kind of things that are going on, and I think people really get addicted to that. So for me, you know, it's been very important to have people along with this journey, and mentoring and bringing people along with this journey as I'm on that journey. I've also, when I was younger, you know, my mum used to drag me. When I was 17, she basically said, you're coming to Melbourne to protest and camp out. You're old enough to get locked up now. You know, that's it. So, you know, I have such a long, like, I have many years in those activist spaces because of that. Because of, you know, I've been a kid with my mum and dad setting up these organisations, the first Aboriginal community-controlled organisations that have ever existed in this country, mind you. You know, I've been very lucky, and I've been dragged along as a young person and being exposed to all these different spaces, and it's given me the confidence. It's given me the confidence to argue with white historians. It's given me the confidence to stand up in front of thousands of people and, you know, tell them that I forgot my words, you know, and just keep moving, like, whatever. You know, I think that's, for me, that's the exciting thing. It's about seeing all these young people see that little thing that clicks in their heads when they go, oh, I can do this. When they come to that realization, like, I can do this. Yeah, I can do this. That for me is the maddest motivation.
Because you worked a lot with kids. I mean, you talked about the you know, the first project you worked on with Red Room, which was all about passing your knowledge on.
I've been working with kids since I was a kid. Ebony Williams, you know, dragged me along to do workshops with kids when I was in year 12. You know, I was always asked to take over the history class anyway, because no white man was ever going to get up and try to tell us our history while I was sitting in there. And all the black kids, you know, I went to Cleveland Street High School. You know, it was full of black kids. It's the local school, so you can imagine a room full of black kids. You know, pretty much telling the teacher to sit down. We want to listen to Sister Lorna. She knows. You know, I was just a little geek. So, you know, I found myself in spaces where people wanted to hear it. Just a lucky sort of thing.
Nardi, was there anything you wanted to add before I mean, we've got a couple more questions if we have time, but we have gone over time. Is there anything you'd like to, some parting words, Nardi?
I just, I had a yarn with Romaine Morton the other day, and all this thinking about how I've been on the sidelines watching this discipline. I can't think of the right way to say it. The first poem I ever heard was performed by Romaine, and I remember feeling unlike I had ever felt before, because it was this beautiful mix of dripping words and tempo and meter and melody. And I just feel I've had a beautifully rich, creative life from that moment to this, and everything that's gone in between, and knowing how we started yarning before we come online, that, you know, everything that will come after us. I just sitting here feeling so embraced by the journey of our people, and the movement of the words they make. So I feel very honoured and privileged to be a listener to that.
She is extraordinary. That book of hers, The Calloused Stick of Wanting, words that had never been put together, I'm sure, in English before. She's put them together. And that's, I think, when poets start to do that and really stretch the language and make you feel, remember things, epigenetic things beyond your living, beyond your experience. That goes right to the heart. Jeanine, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Quite a bit, but we're at the end of the panel. Yeah, look, you don't have to be loud to be heard. That's the other thing I want to say. There'll always be people who want to talk over you, and people who will talk louder and longer, but it's the words that you leave behind that will, you know, ultimately make the difference. And I think a lot of people I've admired, particularly artists, have been people I've admired for their most quiet inner strength, and just their ability to let their own artistic creations speak for themselves. And you know, if you you know, like the saying in English, you know, you don't have to talk something up all the time. Let it talk for itself. And so I like my words, and like the words in this book, to speak for themselves and carry a lot longer after we're all not here, like we're all going to be ancestors, like you said. And yeah, just to remind people back on the title of the book, For All Times and In All Times. And I would also just like to thank my fellow panelists and our audience for being here tonight. And if you want to, people often say, what can I do for First Nations people? Say, well, first and foremost, we're not charity cases, but if you really want to do something, learn something, go and buy some of our books, read some of our books, because they do what national history, like I said, fails to do. Thank you.
Lorna, anything that you'd like to say before we sign off? Do you agree with Jeanine that, you know, that the poem speaks for itself, that it has a life of its own, that those words they are almost independent?
Yeah, look, you know, as a spoken word poet, I have actually I've agonized over the act of publishing work and having my words written down on a piece of paper, and especially like the whole thought of an oral language and an oral history being recorded. Like, you know, I've really fought with myself over that, which is why I guess I've stayed in this spoken word bubble. And, you know, Romaine was the one that really introduced that to this country for us, you know, and I've been so lucky to have Romaine as a mentor for like that fellowship with the Wheeler Centre. You know, I've been so lucky to have worked with Nardi and continue to work with Nardi in other areas. You know, I've been so lucky to work with you. I've been so lucky to be exposed to everyone. And I think for me, like, I have like, there's not many chances that I have gotten to publish work that I've been like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm okay with that being on a page forever, being on a piece of paper, or that can be, you know, traced and tracked down forever. It's in the public domain forever. You know, all those things feel really final to me, and I've actually like really resisted that. But I have been very selective in the pieces of poetry that I have had published. And there's just something about hearing people and feeling that energy. And, you know, I also say, like, people can't claim my work if they can't find it. You know, because in the spoken word poetry, the competitions and that, like, everybody rips each other, and it's shameful. But, you know, yeah, I'm just really grateful to have been given these opportunities to be a part of these great anthologies and this Black renaissance of Black poetry and Black art, because it is a renaissance. It is, you know, like I said, there wasn't many people performing, young people performing and getting up and doing poetry when I was younger. You know, the only people that I did see was Romaine, was, you know, people like looking at Auntie Kath Walker, Auntie who drew the Knuckles books, and, you know, there wasn't really any young people that I could talk to. I was always looked at weird by people, you know, but, you know, you set trends. When you go alone and you do your own thing because you're passionate, people start really, you know, thinking about what they want to do, and it sets a ripple effect.
It's certainly done that. Lorna, thank you so much for being on the panel tonight.
Thank you to everyone too. Hope you have a good night. Stay safe.
Yeah. Nardi, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Big love always.
Yeah. And Jeanine, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to Daniel and to my fellow poets. And
did you want to read your poem?
Oh, I forgot about it.
The time has not passed.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I'll read a short one for you. Thank you. This one's called Narambang Yali, which interprets in Wiradjuri as country speaks, because the first character in any story is country. I'd like to acknowledge Auntie Elaine Lomas for for taking me on this language journey. It's been too long since I sat on granite in my country and thought. Too many years since I breathed this air, Panianing Gana. Felt this dirt, Namani Dagan. Smelt this dust, Bara Nyai Banan. Listened for the sounds of her words that say, Balanda Duhai, Balamo Nyai Wambai, Yabion. History does not have the last word, nor the first. History does not have the first claim, nor the last word. Nihindai Yara, the Harabu, Nihingai Gingu. You can speak us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanine Leane, curator of this collection, extraordinary collection of First Nations poetry called Guwayu, and copies of both Guwayu and the song of Nardi's debut novel, Song of the Crocodile, can be ordered online at any time through the Nib Award community partner and Bondi small business Gertrude and Alice Bookstore Cafe. You can order at gertrudeandalice.com.au for delivery around the country. Thank you to Auntie Lola Ryan for that beautiful welcome to country. Thank you to Waverley Council and Nib Literary Award principal sponsors Mark and Yvette Moran for their continued and generous support of the Nib Award. Thank you to Red Room Poetry, who are responsible for this fantastic panel and of course produced Guwayu. August is Poetry Month, a new initiative presented by Red Room Poetry to celebrate Australian poetry, poets and publishers. There's a whole month of fascinating events underway, and I encourage you to check out redroompoetry.org.au. Sorry, redroompoetry.org for more details. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Daniel Browning. Have a great night.